Okay, everybody. Okay, everybody. Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Are you guys okay with one more presentation?
Yes.
We're gonna make it?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, today, Jean-Pierre and myself will be presenting to you teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling, also called TPRS. Okay, so what is TPRS? Okay, so TPRS storytelling, it's a teaching approach invented by Blaine Ray. He was a Spanish teacher in Bakersfield, California. He was using TPR, total physical response, in the classroom, and TPR was invented by James Asher, and Asher says that students acquire their second language the same way that we acquire our first. Our students learn as babies learn. Okay? So therefore we should not expect them to reproduce the language before they've had an ample amount of time to use it. This idea is that as a baby, right, they get huge amounts of input long before they actually are able to produce the language. So why TPRS, storytelling? Ray found that changing from commands, giving commands in the second language, to using third-person singular, he ran, she ran, allowed him to tell stories, and telling stories, enacting stories is a long-term memory technique. Okay? So asking students to act out the parts of characters and stories preserved this highly effective physical element that had been so powerful in total physical response. So the method combines Dr. Asher's total physical response with Krashen, my favorite, Dr. Stephen Krashen's second language acquisition strategies. Okay, so basically the two came together. Blaine, or Ray, is teaching using TPR. He and Stephen Krashen's ideas came together. They formed and they created TPR storytelling. So it's basically their love child. So teachers who use TPR storytelling base their rationale on Krashen's SLA theories. Krashen says that the best way to help students develop both fluency and accuracy in a language is to expose them to large amounts of comprehensible input. Okay. The steps and techniques in TPR storytelling help teachers provide huge amounts of comprehensible input by making the language spoken in class both comprehensible and engaging through storytelling and reading. I promised myself I was not going to read these slides, and I practiced over and over not to read the slides. Now I'm up here, I'm just reading the slides. Okay, so TPR storytelling, I don't know if I made it very clear, but there was TPR started in the 60s, right? And Ray, this Spanish teacher in Bakersfield, was using TPR, but then thought, if I move away from giving students commands in Spanish, and I focus on third-person singular, I can tell stories. And the students can enact stories. And that's a memory technique, right? Because it's kind of authentic. If I'm actually moving, using gestures like TPR, I'm actually able to acquire that language. So TPR storytelling is divided into 3 steps. Step 1, the teacher establishes meaning. This is the stage where the teacher gives huge amounts of vocabulary to the students. In a lot of the approach that I read, the idea is to introduce only 3 lexical chunks a day in a lesson. In the earlier works I saw, he's talking about using huge amounts of vocabulary. So I got 2 conflicting ideas. The more modern research says introducing 3 lexical chunks in a lesson is about the maximum. Because a guiding principle in all of this is keeping the psychological barrier to education very low, keeping that effective filter very low. Everybody can succeed in this class. Okay? So if I give you too much vocabulary, you're overwhelmed, psychological barrier comes up, I stop learning. So in TPR storytelling, we're only going to learn 3 lexical chunks today. Keep it easy. We're going to have fun, we're going to tell a story. But stage 1 is very academic. It is giving the students the vocabulary up on the blackboard, with translation up on the board as well, so the students can refer to the blackboard. So again, the effective filter, nice and low. They feel like they can look up on the board. And within this, established meaning, and spoken class story, and reading, the teacher does a circling technique, asking over and over again with this circling technique, which I'll mention in a little bit. and you'll come to see that it takes a real master teacher to be able to do this circling technique. Step 2 is the spoken class story. So I moved away from the board. Now we're going to use the lexical chunks I've introduced with your prior linguistic knowledge to create a story. The teacher has a very thin outline, a skeleton outline of a story. And then the teacher starts telling the story, getting students up to move, introducing the language through physical movements. Okay? And this helps the students acquire that language, acquire some competency. Third step, this is through Mr. Stephen Krashen, Dr. Stephen Krashen. He's a big reading believer in reading. So the third part of every lesson is this reading. The students are reading. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So step 1, establish meaning. Introduce students to the new vocabulary. It's written on the blackboard. So if you forget what to say, it's up on the blackboard. So, okay, I'm nice and calm. Okay. Practice saying the new words using gestures. You know, in a style modeled after traditional TPR. There's a great book on using TPR. It's basically a dictionary of all the different gestures you can use. It is incredible. You've never seen, I mean, it's all very real. You're like, oh yeah, I guess we do that. I'm full. I mean, just like every kind of gesture is in there. It's pretty cool. Students are given a chance to get used to how the phrases sound in context. It's not isolated chunks. They hear the language in context. Okay? They get to hear the sound. They're not being asked to reproduce the sound at this moment. They're just hearing it. Now the spoken class story. The story is very short. It'll contain multiple instances of the target chunks in context. The number of times the chunks are heard is further increased by the circling questioning technique, which I'll mention in a little bit. Okay? So the goal for the TPRS teacher is in front of the class, up here, saying the new lexical chunks like 50 times in the lesson. That seemed crazy to me. I'm going to stand here and make you say wolf 50 times. That seems nuts. Wolf, 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 wolf. Oh my god. But with this circling technique, I actually can I can say this word multiple times. I can get you to also repeat it multiple times in context to these questions that I'm framing. Okay, the teacher uses a script, like I said. I flesh out the story using details from the students. So it's this very reciprocal storytelling technique. I have an idea about what the story is meant to say, but if Stacy comes up with an idea, I can take that idea, include it into the story. One of the teachers I observed for this technique, one of his students is caught texting, and he goes to take the phone and includes that into the story, and then brings her into the story because of, she's not supposed to be texting. But then he uses the language that they were learning to tie that into the lesson. So as a teacher, you're really up there, bouncing ideas and language off of the students. It's very holistic. Okay. Stories acted out by students, prompted by asking questioning prompts from the teacher. Okay, so then reading. Reading is a huge part of this approach. This is based off of Krashen's reading hypothesis, which says the more we read in a second language, the greater our vocabulary will be. I personally believe this as well. I believe this too. There's 4 types of reading activities: class reading, free, voluntary reading, shared reading, homework reading. Next slide. So in class reading, okay, this can start at the beginning of the class, in the middle of the class, at the conclusion of the class. In this instance, we're going to use it at the conclusion of the class. Class reading is the most common reading activity. It's based usually on the story that we're telling together. If you look at a one-day lesson, maybe I have a story with 5 elements using these lexical chunks in the story. But then over the course of time, we as a class are telling a story that gets longer and longer and longer and longer. So you are participating in the story, and we're reading the story over and over again. So the story is read aloud, teacher checks for comprehension. The idea here is that by the time I get to step 3, you've heard each one of the new target words many, many, many times. You have multiple exposure. It becomes comprehensible input. And then when you look at the story, with first look, I am comprehending about 80% of the language. Okay? So, gives me a sense of confidence in the class, confidence in myself. I am acquiring this language. Okay? So, this is the idea, for me, this speaks to the idea of not decreasing the difficulty, keeping the difficulty high, but lowering the tasks. If I'm only introducing 3 target words a day, you can attain that level of comprehension. I showed to you in reading, you've acquired that. Reading, Oh, I'm doing really well in class. Okay, good, I got this. Oh, it's easy to learn. Oh, learning a language is easy. I like reading the story that our classes is writing together. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Free voluntary reading, FVR. So the research for FVR is very strong. This is, of course, through Krashen saying, hey, it's really strong. It's shown consistently that free voluntary reading is as good or better than target language lessons. Free voluntary reading can be done in the classroom, at home. What I've done in the past is students, ESL students who are struggling, I call them in and we go through the ESL library and we choose books that are much lower than their actual ability to read. It's like I-1. So I find books that they're interested in, maybe a spy novel or a romance novel or something that they're interested in, but it's a lower level than they're actually able to read. And my goal there is just that they keep on acquiring language, that they go home and they read these books. Maybe they find some joy in reading, maybe they find some confidence and ultimately competence in the target language because they're being exposed to multiple instances of the target language. Okay? So this can be done in class. Beginning of class, students can come in the first 15 minutes, very leisurely. They come in, they choose a book, maybe they're working on a novel in the class. Okay? So this, you can instill this into different parts of the lesson or for homework. Okay? Shared reading. This is kindergarten day. Okay? Just like how the kindergarten teacher sits in the front of the class and everybody's here and I have the book and I'm reading the book to you, I'm showing you the pictures, I'm asking you questions, you are involved in the story that's being told. I was talking with one of our peers and he's saying, well, how about if this language is Mandarin or it's French, where the alphabet doesn't necessarily coincide with the sounds that I might generate? That's what the pictures are there for. Okay, maybe I tap into the illustration, just like a child. And I thought this sounded kind of funny at first. I go online, sure enough, there's adult learners being taught through shared reading. Okay, I personally really like shared reading. I like both aspects. I like being on the one side of the book. I like being on the other side of the book. Story time, I find, is very valid. And this is another way of students being exposed to comprehensible input. It's supposed to be like you're a child again, yeah? Okay, next slide. So here are 3 principles or truths of TPRS. Teach to the eyes. Weighing the pig more often will not make it grow faster, which I love. Thanks, Krashen. And circling is the heart of TPRS. Okay, let's do teach to the eyes. If you leave with nothing else, if you're like, I don't like this, I don't agree, these 3 principles you can take with you into your classroom. Okay? Teach to the eyes. If I am looking, as I'm teaching, if I'm looking a student directly in the eyes, maybe I have more authentic intonation, it becomes more of a conversation, it makes me mindful to keep the rate at which I speak. I'm also, in this exchange, I'm checking for comprehension. Talia completely understands what I'm saying. I can move on to the next student. I engage, I'm teaching, Meg totally understands what I'm saying. So I'm doing assessment all throughout the class. I'm looking. This is part of my assessment. It's not just me handing you a test. This is me checking for comprehension. I can tell by engaging with you through the eyes whether or not you're understanding me. Another one of my peers said, oh, won't this be, won't I be kind of violating a student possibly? Staring them directly in the eyes? But I think that this is just a human exchange. I'm checking for comprehension. I'm showing you that I'm engaged. And I see ultimately that this will also help with discipline in the class. The teacher with his back to the wall writing up here, I'm giving the students an opportunity not to listen, right? But if I'm engaging you, looking you in the eyes, this cuts down on discipline problems. At the same time, I'm doing assessment. It's also very human, yeah? This is a human exchange. So, I'm showing that I care in the class. So teach to the eyes. Great principle. I love it. Next one. On assessment. Weighing the pig more often will not make it grow faster. Okay? If I weigh my pig, my pet pig I'm raising, if I weigh it every day, it doesn't make that grow faster, right? It's a weird idiom, I guess. Assessment in TPR storytelling is ongoing. I'm checking for your comprehension daily, yeah? By asking questions. Who is this? If I'm saying, who is Papa? And you can't tell me, I know that we're not ready to move on to that part. I can back off a little bit and check for comprehension that way. Students who are answering are understanding. Sure. I can see that. Yeah. Even if you're not orally answering, I can see by your face that you're understanding. This is an answer. Yeah, this is an answer. check with the pace setter students, kind of like a barometer student. If I have a student in class that I know is excelling, I can check with them. I can base the speed of the class or the task difficulty by checking in. Oh, for real? Next slide. Okay, I'll hurry this up then. So on testing, I like this. An unannounced vocabulary test, right? This is all vocabulary based. I'm giving you lots of vocabulary. An unannounced test shows how well you've acquired that vocabulary. But an announced test tests you on how good you are at memorizing and how good you are at testing, right? My goal is that you acquire language. So I would give you unannounced vocabulary tests. Okay? So Ray says that he gives an extra credit question at the end of all his tests. And I love this. Tell me what's going on in your life. Answer in English. Why do I do this? It shows I'm actually interested in what's going on in your life. Some elements that you're using I may use in the next storytelling. Also gives you an opportunity to exercise some of that new vocabulary. Okay? So I love this. Tell me what's going on in your life. Next slide. Oh my God. Okay. Circling. Here are the 10 steps for circling. Okay? This is how I get an opportunity to say each word 50 times in a lesson, right? Let's go to the next slide because I'll just give you an example. So here's an example of circling. I have some new vocabulary that I want my students to learn. Class, Dad wants to eat a wolf. Oh. Does Dad want to eat a wolf?
Yes, Dad wants to eat a wolf.
Does Dad want to eat a wolf or a sandwich?
Dad wants to eat a wolf.
Oh, okay. Class, does Dad want to eat a sandwich?
No, Dad does not want to eat a sandwich.
What does Dad want?
Dad wants to eat a wolf.
Okay, so there's 10 elements in here, alright? I make a statement using the vocabulary that I'm wanting you to use. I make a statement, I ask a question where it's going to be yes, I ask an either or. Does Meg want a sandwich or a burrito? I've talked over these words. We know Meg wants a burrito, come on. So, Meg wants a burrito. Does Meg want a pizza? No, Meg doesn't want a pizza, she wants a burrito. Class, what does Meg want? Meg wants a burrito. And then this is the circling. And I can see that this would take a lot of exercise. Being able to do this on the fly, every day in class, this circling technique, this would take a lot of work. But even just a couple days of me trying to do this, I can see that it is something you can do. Always ending with an interrogative at the end to try and get them again. Here I've been able to say the target lexicon 10, or how many times? 10 times each? Yeah. So, anyway. Next slide. Okay, thanks. We encourage you to conduct your own research. Please apply, if anything, just the technique, or just the principles. And it's an amazing approach. There is a lot of online research about this. There's really no heavy academic texts about TPRS. It's kind of like a subculture of teaching. It's all online. It's one teacher here sharing their data with another teacher. So it's really cool to hop on. Okay, thanks.
We're going to Spanish. No,
We're not done.
We're going to Spanish lesson right now. Okay, I have here the translation, but I want you guys to not check it out until we're done. Just to see where your level's at. Nick, you already have it.
Yo hablo español.
Gracias.
Hola, clase.
Hola.
¿Cómo están? ¿Todo bien? ¿Todo?
Estoy bien.
Estoy bien. ¿Y tú?
Nico.
Sí.
Nico, vení acá al frente, vení.
Sí.
Vení al frente. Today, class, we are going to learn a story. We're going to learn these vocabularies. We picked a lot. We should have picked 3. Okay? Nico.
Sí, sí.
Nico es el papá.
El papá.
El papá, Nico es el papá. ¿Quién es Nico?
El papá.
Nico es el papá. Nico llora.
Oh. Pobre papá.
¿Qué hace el papá?
Llora.
Papá llora. Llora. Nico come. Come. ¿Qué hace Nico?
Nico come.
¿Quién es Nico? ¿Quién es Nico?
Papá.
Papá.
Nico es el papá. ¿Y qué hace Nico?
Yo soy papá.
Llora.
Papá.
¿Llora? Ok. Digamos, familia, nosotros, familia. Familia. ¿Qué es una familia?
Familia.
Nosotros.
Children.
El lobo. El lobo.
It's your ears. It's your ears.
¿Qué es un lobo? ¿Qué es un lobo? ¿Qué es un lobo? ¿Qué es? Amigos, todos amigos.
Sí.
¿Qué es un amigo?
Nosotros.
Amigo.
¿Sí? Okay.
Amiga.
¿Amigo? ¿Amiga? Enojado.
JP.
No.
No.
Enojado. No es un cáncer. Enojado, enojado.
Angry. Angry.
Triste.
Triste.
Papá está triste. Triste, triste. One is also.
Do you want somebody else or me?
Me.
Soy papá. Papá.
¿Qué es un papá? ¿Qué es un papá?
Nico.
Next.
Papá es parte de la familia.
Sí.
Papá es parte de la
Papá
familia.
es parte de la familia.
El papá está enojado.
Sí.
El papá está enojado.
Enojado.
Porque está muy solo.
Sí.
Está muy solo el papá.
¿Toro?
He's mad because of- También está enojado porque tiene hambre. Está enojado porque tiene hambre y está solo. ¿Qué es un lobo? ¿Qué es un lobo?
Nico.
Nico.
¿Qué es un lobo?
Es un
Wolf.
wolf.
Un wolf. Un lobo es un animal. El lobo está triste. El lobo está triste. El lobo tiene hambre. Tiene hambre.
Tiene hambre. Para.
También está muy solo. El lobo. Solo. Nick wrote the story, man. El lobo llora. 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 Papá invita al lobo a cenar.
Come. Ven aquí, lobo.
Cenar, dinner.
Cena.
¿Cuándo es la cena? ¿Cuándo es la cena?
A las 6.
A las 7.
A las 7.
El papá invita al lobo a cenar a las 7.
Come over to my house for dinner at 7.
Ahora son amigos. So they're not alone anymore. He wanted them to eat each other.
I thought they were going to eat each other because he was inviting a wolf into his house.
Okay.
They could both
So-
become werewolves.
In the worksheet we have, since TPRS is, we have all the, what we use, all the nouns, all the adjectives that we use in the exercise, which was very well played out by Mr. Nico.
Hola.
We have
Soy
a
papá.
matching game, a matching test, and we want to see if you guys were able to retain anything. Because TPRS states that if the student does not retain 80%,
Yeah.
you reassess and reteach. It was a pretty quick lesson.
And for testing, for testing with TPRS, it says very simple L1 to L2 matching.
It's
not asking
it's the, it's the second to
It's not
last
asking for much.
I know.
page. You know Spanish already?
I know.
Well, we figured,
Yes,
yeah.
Did you this one?
That one, yeah, just match it up.
Oh.
And then you can just tell us how you are.
Yeah.
Just see how you scored. See how if you were able to retain anything.
Yeah. Don't worry about doing well on this test or anything, you guys.
We're grading it.
We're not. Yeah. Marty's great. Yeah, a simple L1 to L2 matching at the end. But then, most importantly, at the bottom is a question. Did it print out? Oh, it didn't print out on this one. Oh,
But regardless,
well, at the end of this test, we had two, I guess. At the end of this test, most importantly, what's going on in your life? If you could write like a sentence or so about what's going on in your life.
In
Most importantly,
English.
in English. At the bottom, what's going on in your life right now? And then if I was teaching using this approach, I would read these comments and I would try and use some of what you've said in tomorrow's story.
Oh.
And also I'm checking to see
Yo
if maybe you're...
entiendo ahora.
Oh,
Oh.
boy, your Spanish is so good. That's what JP.
Me gusta este presentación.
Presentación.
Presentación, sí.
Bravo.
Gracias, profe.
Claro que sí.
That's what I got.
What's going on in your life? That's what you would answer at the bottom in English. I would see if maybe you're using some of the language that you're learning. See if maybe you're not understanding.
I could ace this test.
Could you? Yeah, like 100%.
¿Por qué?
People are taking the test pretty seriously. Who knew? What's your question? Which one?
I don't know the question words.
The question words?
Yeah.
Ah.
I see them, but I
¿Quién
don't.
es? Ah, I am Papa. ¿Quién?
¿Quién es
¿Quién es?
Papa?
Who? Why? Wait, who?
Who?
Oh, I don't even
Who?
know. I'm gonna stop trying to speak Spanish.
¿Quién? Who?
I'm checking
What?
for comprehension, but I didn't hear.
¿Cuándo? When? ¿A dónde? Where? ¿Por qué? Why? Was it why where?
No, you
Yeah.
just said it in the accent. It's
And
fine.
actually, I would
¿Por
have.
qué? Why?
I actually would also. I would have the English next to these words. If it's a monolingual class, I'm teaching Spanish. I would have the English here. Difficult if there's 6 different languages in the class to have the translation up here. But if it's a monolingual class, I would have the translation right up to it. Because it's not so much that this is a test, it's that this is a resource, so you can
Yeah,
check.
and most of the time, in most classes, like you were saying in the presentation, the PowerPoint, they'll pick 3 or 4 words.
Yeah. I'm
So we
introducing
just kind of
3 words.
threw a bunch up there, you know?
It's assumed, we assumed that our class, the theoretical class, had the interrogative questions and a number of these nouns. But in a regular lesson, I would be introducing only 3 a day, or chunks a day. You guys have any questions? No, hablo español. You got Japanese? So cool.
Hi.
Hi. Any questions, any comments? I can see you guys are really tired.
I have some comments,
We're relaxed. You told
Are you
us the story.
relaxed? Oh, good. Let's friends.
because I question the small amount of, what's it called, of what you're introducing, because it seems to me that, particularly in Romance language, there's so many cognates, there's so many common roots, that I think you could introduce a lot more. If you had, if you enabled the students to understand the building of the words and the language itself, and the similarities and the cognates, I think you could introduce a ton more every day that they would retain.
Sure. And I think when I did the math, thank you. When I did the math, if I'm introducing 3 new chunks, not necessarily even just words, but chunks a day, and I'm not expecting them to be able to reproduce that sound. Remember at the very beginning of the presentation, one of the guiding ideas here is that we learn a 2nd language or a 3rd language or a 4th language the way that a baby learns language, which is that I receive huge amounts of input before I can produce. So if you're not on board, I think, if you're not on board with that idea, then yeah, this approach doesn't make
I'm
much
not
sense.
completely, because we are not babies, and we have a history of
You're right,
pattern recognition.
we're not babies, but
No.
we may acquire language the same way that we acquire
Well,
language when we were
Friends,
born.
I gave a lesson yesterday in Laos, my personal experience, and I did advanced level lexicon,
Uh-huh.
and I introduced, I had my class pick the terms themselves from my reading,
Uh-huh.
and just working with more than they had more than 10 terms,
Uh-huh.
was very difficult for even grad students, you know?